Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamingTech.com video we have yet more on the PlayStation 4 DRM issues from yesterday, as well as comments from Electronic Arts on their stance of used games. So just yesterday, there was information that Sony may not be so forgiving on the DRM as what they'd claimed previously. Jack Treaton had appeared in an interview and claimed that DRM decisions would be down to the publishers themselves, which of course was a bit of a turnabout because up until that point, Sony had been very clear on the fact that you could basically just give a disc to someone and that would be the end of it. So obviously they were called to clarify their stance on the whole used game situation because obviously people were left, well, very confused with this. And although we don't have all of the answers, we certainly have some of the answers. So we're going to be going through some quotes and some scenarios and so forth in this video, and we're also going to be talking about Electronic Arts as well as their own DRM stance as well. If you are thinking to yourself that the DRM saga could make a book to rival Lord of the Rings, you are not alone. Anyway, Sony Communications Director, his name is Dan Race, was telling Gamefront in an interview, and I quote, "The online pass program for PlayStation first-party games will not continue on PS4. Similar to PS3, we will not dictate the online used game strategy, the ability to play used games online, of its publishing partners. As announced last night, PS4 will not have any gating restrictions for used disc-based games. When a gamer buys a PS4 disc, they have the right to use that copy of the game, so they can trade in the game at retail, sell it to another person, lend it to a friend, or keep it forever." End quote. And what do we have? Well, it does clarify the situation quite a bit, but obviously there is still DRM in place. Now the first one is the traditional DRM policy of not lending a game applies to digitally downloaded games, so that's as a normal. Now obviously with the PS3 and PSN, you can actually play games over multiple accounts, or should I say multiple consoles. For example, let's say you and your friend Tom, I don't know why I always use the name Tom, but it's simple and fun, so I shall stick with it, darn it. If you and your friend Tom both own PlayStations and you both download games and both have PSN, you could theoretically take your game around Tom's house, or should I say log in around Tom's house and then download a copy of the game, and he can play that game on his account. So let's say, for example, your account name is John and you log in with John. He could not know your password, but he can still play the game, because obviously you may not want him to know their password if you have, say, for example, your credit card on the account and so forth, which is completely understandable. So that's pretty good. It's not 100% clarified yet, as far as I understand it, and I have been looking around, maybe I've missed it, so you guys can comment, or better still, message on Facebook. That would be facebook.com/redgamingtech, and I'll either do an updated video, or I'll do an article or an annotation to this video, or something or another on the situation, but they haven't really clarified whether that's still there. But traditional DRM, as far as you understand it, is still there for digitally downloaded games. For first-party games, there is no online restrictions at all, apart from possibly the DRM for online digital games. Now, the important part here is that if you were to go into a store, whatever that is, whether it's a supermarket, whether it's a proper game store, so for example in the UK, that would be something like Game, or if you're in the United States, that would be like GameStop, I believe you guys have, and you were to buy a game, take it home, put it into your PS4, play it, enjoy it, complete it, whatever, and then your friend wants to borrow it off of you, or you just simply don't like the damn thing, or you want to trade it in, what have you, you are free to do so, my good sir, or my good lady. That is completely up to you. The really key thing here, though, and the thing that Sony have been, of course, beating Microsoft mercilessly on the head with, is that you don't need to worry about logging online to play your game. There is no 24-hour restriction, and this to me is the key, because as it turns out, it's not the used game thing that I think has been really upsetting people, primarily. I mean, don't get me wrong, some people are pissed at that. And, that's fair on them. But to me, it's actually not the thing that really annoys me most about the Xbox One. The thing that really pisses me off about the Xbox One is the 24-hour activation thing. In my opinion, they could have easily made it longer. They could have made it 24. Could have made it like 48 hours. They could have made it 72 hours. I do, however, know why they've done that. Of course, it's so that you can't go offline and then say play that game for 3 or 4 days and just blast through it. Because obviously, some of you guys are really quick gamers. Me personally, because I don't really have as much time as I used to. It takes me bloody ages to complete a game. But some of you guys will, and this is the same with Spoony Kipper, by the way, on the channel. He'll just message me like, oh, I started playing X, and 2 days later I'll be like, oh, how far are you? And he's like, yeah, I completed it, I've got all the gold trophies. I'm just like, oh, sad face. Because obviously, you'll just stay on the game because you've got time off work or whatever, and you'll just blast through the game. So obviously that's one of the reasons that these restrictions exist. And of course the 1 hour activation if you're playing the game around a friend's house. However, for many situations and scenarios for people with crappy internet, or for example if you're organising tournaments and that type of thing, it's just bad, and I think that's one of the reasons that people are upset. However, DRM, generally speaking, and consoles is a really sticky subject, because most people, rightly so, say, well, you know what, we're paying like $40 and PC owners are paying like $29, so okay, we can understand that they get DRM, but why do we pay like £10 more and then we get DRM? Now, obviously, there are licensing fees or additional licensing fees involved, which, of course, PC developers don't need to pay, but still, from the customer's perspective, why do we give a rat's ass about that? So, the other thing, of course, would be the online component for third-party games. Now, obviously, there is the online pass system, so theoretically, it could be locked down by publishers. Sony themselves have said that they don't feel that the online pass model has been particularly successful. Indeed, he was Jim Ryan from Sony is even quoted in saying, and I obviously quote, that the online pass model hasn't been particularly successful, even in terms of the impact on the relationship with the publisher and their customers, or, from what we understand, in financial terms. Now remember that Sony themselves cannot dictate what publishers do with their own servers, and that's the key, because a single-player game is a single-player game is a single-player game. What the hell do I mean by that? Well, in other words, Sony's PlayStation 4 is all it is required to play a copy of a single-player game. I'll give you guys a really simple example. Let's say all you are going to do is play say, Call of Duty single-player mode. I know there's barely anyone that's actually going to do that. Just buy Call of Duty for the single-player mode. But let's assume that you were to do that, right? All that is required to play that game, for all intents and purposes, is your PS4, right? Aside from the TV and obvious other things, let's not talk about silly things. Let's just, assume you've got all that stuff. All that's really required is a PlayStation 4. On the other hand, if you want to start playing games online, most likely you are going to need a server-based system, specifically if there are going to be updates and so on. And this is really true if it's an MMO. Alright, so let's say you would have, say, Diablo 3, okay? To play certain parts of that game, or even the whole thing, a lot of the time you need a server, which obviously you can select your server when you're first starting the game, and that's it. Now, Sony cannot dictate that company, they cannot mandate that company will indefinitely run the servers for that game, or they will not block your access to that game because it is not their property. Therefore, that company could do what the hell they like. So, I think we've made it relatively clear now on the side of Sony. And Sony are really, although they're not exactly saying it, because obviously they can't say that we are telling publishers A. But I think they feel very vindicated. They feel that they made the right decision based upon the reactions of the crowd, right? And that's the thing. Customers, I've always said this, but we are like, it's a circle, right? And therefore, parts to the circle. The first is the hardware developers, right? So Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo. Then, and obviously PC as well, but let's just keep it simple for now. The second is, of course, the publishers. Third is, of course, you as customers. And fourth is like channels like myself or review websites and so forth. So in other words, we look at, Sony provide a platform, the developers provide the games, obviously, on that platform. You guys provide the money, and we provide ways to let you guys know about the games that are being released, right? The hype machine, if you will. The bottom line is, from my perspective, if you do not buy a game, right, or you are not interested in that game, then it's as simple as the fact that those publishers are not going to make money, and therefore they cannot exist. Therefore, in that respect, you guys have complete and utter power in the industry. You are the consumers, you drive what they do, and obviously when they have been seeing a round of applause, and they've been seeing just how important certain things are to the consumer, they are taking note of that. And this has been really easy to understand by some of the decisions that Electronic Arts have made. Obviously, EA have just abolished the online pass system. Why? Because EA were voted a couple of times in a row to be the worst company in the world. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to that point of view, because, I think there's probably... Actually, I believe it's worst company in America. I don't necessarily, if I subscribe to that point of view, I don't know if they are the worst, but still, they won the award, so it's not a particularly good award to win. It's not like you're being voted best company in America or whatever. And they certainly aren't doing themselves any favours, because they were getting to the point where people were saying to themselves, oh god, it's a Electronic Arts game, and I don't want to buy this, but crap, I have to. And that's not a good situation for you to be in, because it also means that the games that you're not really sure if they're going to be big hits, you're not sure if to release those, because, well, you've already got bad feelings from your customers. Therefore, it means that you can't really take risks. You have to make sure it's the big games, and therefore that pisses off your customers even more, because your customers will say, wow, these guys never take any risks at all. It's always the same thing. So it's kind of a vicious circle. So obviously EA have been going back on that somewhat, and they've been trying to make amends to the customers, which is really good in my opinion. And I actually really like a lot of EA's franchise. I don't particularly have anything against EA apart from the acquisition of Bullfrog. I really wish they'd continue with some of Bullfrog's games, but that's a different story. Oh, and of course Westwood as well, but once again. Anyway, I digress. So obviously, moving on to the Xbox One, it's fairly, just for a second, even though this is primarily a PlayStation video, but let's talk for a moment about the Xbox One. It's fairly obvious how it works. You can only trade in your games at participating retailers, but on the other hand, third-party publishers may actually opt in or out of this. So in other words, if they say, well, we don't want you to sell on our games, tough. If you want to sell on... If, on the other hand, they want to support used games sales, then that's also fine. It's all down to Microsoft. But of course, there's a 24-hour DRM. So obviously, it's a lot more stringent just out of the box. So the question is, what are companies like Electronic Arts thinking? Because ultimately, that is really how things are going to be going forward, right? Because if companies like EA take a stance, it's a good chance that smaller publishing companies will also follow suit. And if they don't, well, that's up to them. But I would rather EA, Activision of course, Ubisoft, take a stance of, you know what, we support used games, because, well, let's just be honest, if they do, it's a pretty damn good percentage of the gaming market. So as you guys know, EA have recently, as I've just said, abandoned the online pass system, and now they are saying in an interview, and I believe I'm pronouncing this guy's name correctly, but I'm possibly not, so don't shoot me, Patrick Suderland. He is EA Games label boss and executive, and he's in charge of games like Battlefield 4, Dragon Age, and so forth, so in other words, really, really, really good titles. Now, while most companies have refused to actually announce what their plans are. EA are being a bit more open-mouthed. They're actually telling us some stuff. They're not revealing everything, however. So, in an interview, they have stated, "We announced that we have abandoned Online Pass. We're not going to be doing that anymore. And we're not going to be doing that because we talked to people, our fans and our players, and they said, listen, we don't want to play our games like this. We listened to them and we have removed it. It's that simple. We don't have a problem with second-hand sales as they are today. We clearly articulated our stance when we abandoned Online Pass." So, I'll quote for a second. The question is, are EA going to do anything to combat used game sales at all? And there's not exactly an answer, but here's a reply anyway. "We obviously have to look at what first parties are doing and follow any rules, but we have to scramble after these conferences and come back with what we think is right. But again, our general thesis is what the fans tell us they want, we give it to them. And that if that's what the fans want, then we'll look into that, and if that's what they want, then we'll probably allow that." Now, out of quote for a second, that doesn't mean that they won't opt in the supporting of game resale, but they may want to impose, say, transfer fees to generate some revenue from the used game market. Now, president of EA Labels has also given his 2 cents as well, and has stated during an investor call, "We are formulating our strategy based on the information that they released. In general, we'll be looking at the gamer-first perspective, so we continue to have a relationship with used game users that is a positive experience," and that is end quote. And what the hell does that mean? Because this is really... it's really weird, isn't it? Well, I think there are several things to note. First of all, if you are EA, you do not just make money from the initial sale, okay? When you have sold your game, EA, along with most companies, now release DLC. And you can still make money from DLC, is basically what it comes down to. So they're going to look at it and say, look, if we allow used game sales, can microtransactions, can we make money from DLC? Can we make money on the fact that people will now like this franchise and will probably be hungry to buy the newest installment? Because that's the thing, right? They have to look at what is the biggest way to make money. Indeed, in a separate interview, and it's completely off topic of Sony and Microsoft for a moment, let's talk about Shigeru Miyamoto. Now, of course, he is fairly well known at Nintendo, and he has also been talking about used games, and he's actually stated, and I quote, "We don't have a particular stance on used games. For us, it's less about used games, and it's more about illegal copying of games that we're really worried about. By creating the games that we create and selling those games, it enables us to create new versions of those games. We're more worried about piracy, and we think used games as a whole are a story. In fact, from our perspective, you can create a game that people want to keep playing for a long time. That's the approach we take, and that's the best way to avoid used games." End quote. So, obviously, he is someone who knows the gaming industry quite well. He's been around the block, so to speak. And he has a point. That's the thing. If you create a gaming experience that people want to keep coming back to, now my concern with all of this is online. Now, I don't mean online at DRM, of course. I mean online as in, I don't want there to be an abundance of online features a la Mass Effect 3. Now, I liked Mass Effect 3, despite the fact it has a really divisive opinion. Some people hate ME3, some people love ME3. Personally, I did not like the multiplayer component one iota, one bit, one smidge, or one tiny little smidgen. I hated it, because despite the fact that EA did say that it was originally going to be included in number 2, it just felt tacked on. And more to the point, I didn't give a rat's ass. This is one of the concerns I have with a lot of games like this, and one of the reasons that I'm really against Legacy of Kain, the MMO, or whatever the hell it's going to turn out to be. One of the reasons that I didn't want Star Wars, because up until that point, we have been playing that game with the understanding and the reasoning that we are Commander Shepard, right? Just to use that example. Now, obviously, no one really thinks they are Commander Shepard. But my point being that you feel like you are in charge of the destiny of this universe. It is you. It is not, you and, PwnNoob 2003 who happens to try and teabag every single enemy corpse that he sees or decides to jump in and out. And this is one of the things I hate about Resident Evil 6, right? And it, somewhat to the degree, actually, of Revelations, though obviously online mode isn't really the thing with Revelations, but the thing about Resident Evil 6 is that as soon as you start playing with random people, I own Resident Evil 6, yeah, it's on my Steam account, but I turn off every bloody online feature that I can the moment I start playing Resident Evil 6. Why? Because I do not want a random people jumping into my game. Not because I think every single person ever sucks, but there's a good chance that someone will be annoying. It's that simple. And if I'm playing a game like Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, World of Warcraft, great. All the more, fantastic, but I don't want used games. I don't want the stance of this to be that, okay, well, we need to start adding more multiplayer features or focus more on multiplayer games, because that discourages used game sales, because that's not really the case. Like, for example, if you look at how difficult certain games are of Nintendo, and I'm not talking about hard as in the bosses are difficult, I'm talking about the longevity. I don't know anyone that's actually sold a Nintendo game that is like Mario or Wind Waker or Zelda or something. I honestly don't. Even and I'm not a particularly staunch Nintendo fan whatsoever. I do own a GameCube. I do own a Wii U, an original Wii. I don't own a Wii U, but I actually own every single title, and I've kept every single Nintendo title that I've bought, because I know that those games are going to be worthy to play again in, say, 6 years' time, let alone 6 months' time, because there's always something you have missed, and that's the key, really. And I agree with this guy totally on this, because if you produce a title that is worthy to play, and that's the thing with Mass Effect, right? I've bought Mass Effect because I loved the series, and I know at some point or another I will recomplete it, because I actually bought Dragon Age, the original Dragon Age, on Steam, even though I'd already completed it, or basically completed it, back in the day. I think I was playing it on console, if I remember correctly. I think it was the Xbox, but something happened to the copy, or I borrowed it from a friend, or whatever. But then I decided, I want this bloody game because it's really good, and I know at some point I will complete it again, so I bought it. And that's the thing. If you put enough money, if you put enough thought, if you put enough love, if you put enough care into your product, people will want to keep it. Now, of course, I'm not saying that everyone will love this game. I'm not saying that you will never see copies of that game. It is that simple, right? Because, well, some people just like trading in their games because they don't have much income, or maybe they just don't want to keep it. And that's the other way to look at it as well. Let's say that you are someone on a low budget. Then people trade in games for that reason. But then they may not trade in the game for a used copy. For example, let's say that you have Game A, and you've completed Game A, and you're finished with Game A. You'll trade in your copy of Game A, but you'll buy a new copy of Game B, because that's just how you want to do it. Now, obviously, that's not to say that I don't have sympathies for the used game market. I've mentioned before that I don't particularly like it from the perspective of customers, because I don't think that customers get a particularly great deal from a lot of stores, but you could check out other videos on my particular feelings on that. I've made them fairly clear before, so I'm not going to bore you guys. If you don't know my opinions, or you're curious, you can check out a video, something like It says pausing to try and bloody well remember the title. Use games and, that would be ampersand, DRM, are use games bad for the gaming industry? And how far is too far with DRM? You could search for that title on our channel, and you will be entertained for at least 33 minutes because it's pretty damn long, and I did do some research for it as well. So anyway, hopefully, one would hope that you have enjoyed this video. Obviously, we'll be keeping on top of this because it's really it's basically the elephant in the room at this point. It doesn't seem to be wanting to go away, and that's cool because I think that it could become a bit of a boring topic in one respect, but at the end of the day, this is affecting your customer rights, and so I think that's why so many people are jumping on it. And well, we'll just have to see. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft do change some of their policies somewhat because, well, E3 didn't go particularly too well for them, from what I understand. I'm not going to reveal all my thoughts on E3 yet. Why? Because I don't think it's fair. I mean, I've seen some websites already saying these are the winners and losers of E3, which is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion because there's still a couple of days left, and honestly speaking, you can't say who the winners and losers are yet because the dust hasn't even settled, in my personal opinion. Anyway, hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. I'm sorry it's been a fairly rambly one, but we've covered some ground here, and I'm quite pleasantly surprised. I'm actually quite happy that I'm actually really happy with what Sony have decided. It's basically what it comes down to. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I wish Microsoft would adopt a similar policy, but we'll have to see what happens in regards to that. I'm really happy that EA are pioneering this. Now, obviously, it's not been confirmed just how stringent or how free, should I say, they're going to be with their policies. Hopefully, they're going to be fairly generous, and they're going to make a lot of money on DLC, and that's fine. I have no problem with DLC purchases at all, as long as they're not crap DLC. In other words, what I hate on DLC, just to summarize, is basically when you're paying like $5 for a costume pack, and that costume pack does absolutely nothing, and it was already on the disc originally. I hate that crap. On the other hand, if the DLC is something along the lines of, let's say, a 2-hour extension to the single-player campaign. Now, I'm not talking about, something that should have been there originally because it was locked off. I'm talking about something like Kasumi's Hidden Memory, and I've used that example so many times now from Mass Effect, of course. But still, it's well worth it. Also, for example, the Goblin Menace from Trine 2, that type of thing. I have absolutely no problem with that type of DLC, and you know what? My friends, and I of course talk about game publishers and developers here, you can charge me that money all day long. I will be happy to pay it because I absolutely loved the game originally, and I will be more than happy to reimburse you with more hard work because I want to play more of that game. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. We'll have to see how long until I make another DRM video, because I have a feeling it won't be long given the constant influx of news on the situation. But for now, I'm going to bid you farewell, and hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I will see you soon. Take care, and bye for now.